Hey, Pastor Steve Waldron. I hope you're having a great day or night in Jesus. Thank you so much for being with us. This is the Adam fallacy in predestination. So thanks for being here. Let's take a look at this. I actually got it from one of our viewers in a comment section who says they dealt with someone who believed in absolute predestination. Now, before we get into the Adam fallacy, again, thanks for being here. Let's see what we mean by predestination. Of course, the Bible teaches predestination. And so it teaches predestination of groups that, like, the church is predestined to do this, or Israel is predestined for this, and on and so forth. But it doesn't teach individual predestination between heaven and hell. Now, as you do a study on predestination, and we may do some further study, I've done some videos over the years on it, but never just a total deep dive, so to speak, with lapsarianism and supralapsarianism and infralapsarianism, those type things, even though I think I've made some videos on what those particular words mean, that we understand that there's nuances within predestination. Is there, were you predestined to go to hell before the foundation of the world? Does predestination only cover salvation? Does it only cover salvation? Not only are you going to heaven, but does it cover just that, and you have free will other than salvic choices, on and on. So there's so many different questions and nuances on the very subject of predestination. But again, the Bible very clearly teaches predestination. I would say that it teaches predestination of groups, people groups and all that, not individuals taking away free will. Because we're in the image of God. God obviously has free will, and it seems free will is just taught from Genesis 1, really, throughout the remainder of Scripture. The Adam fallacy is this, that if we're so sinful, and we know that Adam, before the fall, did not have a sinful nature, but still mankind could not make a proper decision with God. He was created not to be able to make a proper decision with God. So if it was God's will for him to fall, well, then Adam did the will of God. He chose the will of God. And so how did he choose the will of God to bring the fall into the world? Now, I realize the rejoinder of that is going to have to do with the sinful nature of man, that Adam before, when he was in innocence, did not have a sinful nature. But I still don't think that totally takes away the culpability and the seriousness, really, of this particular argument, because you've got mankind, that it was God's will for man to fall. Adam did the will of God, and he was punished for doing the will of God. And so this not only carries on with Adam, it carries on with much of the predestination theory, I would say false theory, and I have many friends and relatives I love that believe in various forms of predestination. I remember when I first got Calvin's Institutes, I was surprised really at how it was basically just a panegyric trying to justify the killing of Servetus, at least the 1557 edition that I got, that seems to be the scholarly edition. He went through Calvin's Institutes, went through several iterations. So when people say I read Calvin's Institutes, of course the next thing is which one, which iteration, because it did change over the course of time. And so that if I'm a sinner and I'm destined for hell and I'm doing God's will by sinning, how am I therefore punished by doing the will of God? Now, of course, there are greater and lesser forms of doing the will of God, and none of them have to be soteriological or salvic or dealing with salvation. So understand that. But I do think this Adam fallacy with predestination, that Adam chose correctly according to predestination to bring sin into the world, thereby, like Isaiah 45:7, doesn't just mean evil in the source of the medieval translation of that term evil, lack of peace and all that, but it means God himself created evil, not that which became evil, like, Lucifer and all of this. Wow. And so then you get into the justice of God, which is always an extremely, extremely precarious subject when you're dealing with predestination, especially from the predestinationist side. Of course, the rejoinder that who are you to argue against God? And I've done a commentary online here, YouTube. I appreciate YouTube for letting us upload them, on the book of Romans, chapters 1 through 16. And so we've gone verse by verse through Romans 9 through 11, showing that the primary focus there is about Israel and the Gentiles, and again, not individuals, even though I understand he chooses Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. But we understand, we go into all the implications about that. And you usually interpret verses, if there's an overwhelming number of verses that appear one way, you would interpret the smaller amount of verses predicated on the larger. And I think predestination turns that on its head. So it tries to translate very few verses in Proverbs, Romans, Acts 13:48 and the like. It tries to interpret the gist of the Bible on the fulcrum of a few verses instead of the overwhelming bulk of all the verses. It's the reason I've come to the conclusion Acts 2:38 is the plan of salvation, because that's from Genesis to Revelation in typology and implication, all this. So God bless. You can choose through the help of God to serve him. God bless you. Bye-bye.